We're going to talk about an age-old debate. And no, it's not Star Wars versus Star Trek or Yankees versus Red Sox. It's something that is almost as equally important as those two things. We're going to be talking about bugging in versus bugging out. This is the Urban Sentinel, and let's get into it. Now, I'm going to try to keep this as concise as possible. I'm not going to cover every single situation that a person might choose to bug in or bug out. I'm going to hit a couple of the key bullet points for things that are most common, things that tend to happen on a regular basis or more often across the country or globally, as it were. Now, we're going to start with two basic concepts. We're going to lay those down. Bugging in is simply wherever you live, effectively speaking, that's where you stay. Now, if you live in a small apartment, but you've got close friends or family that you go to sometimes when the power goes out from a snowstorm or something like that, and you've got an either unspoken or even spoken agreement that if something were to happen, something bad or dangerous, you go to their place, then that would be considered to one extent you're bugging in, because yes, you are leaving your actual residence, but you're leaving it under the premise that that's where you're going to be staying. Now, splitting the hairs on that with bugging out, you could also, again, leave from where you live and go to another location, but for the sense of the danger that might be imminent, there is almost to one extent no point in bugging out to a location that's a half a mile away from where you're at. Because if there's that significant of a threat to make you leave your residence, you need to be much farther away. If the house next door is on fire because the rest of the block has been firebombed and it's spreading, going four houses down to a good friend of yours isn't really going to save either one of you. It's just going to delay the inevitable of the rest of the block, your house and everything else catching up and catching on fire there. So you want to look at it from that aspect. When you bug out, you're trying to get as much distance between where you were, presumably where that threat actively was or where that threat would be approaching, to someplace safer. And again, there's no place entirely safe, so you're just someplace safer, much farther away, to give you breathing room, because depending upon the type of scenario, you may have to pick up and move once again. So there are several different things you can look at it. You can look at it from a local standpoint, as I mentioned, with an out of control fire. That could happen under many conditions. An airliner might crash, a fuel tanker truck at a gas station might blow up. You may have an explosion going on at some factory and things just overwhelm the fire department first responders before they have a chance to control anything, and it just steamrolls from there. A lot of things can happen locally that once you do get 1 mile, 2 mile, 5 miles away, you're completely unaffected. But again, also too, as we've seen with the East Palestine train derailment, that plume covered miles upon miles of area and blew where the wind took it, causing a lot more problems for the people that even got out of the immediate area, because it effectively blew right over them. So you're never quite sure on certain local events how far or how big it's going to get. Regional takes it to that next step, that next farther out level. You could look at regional as your county and surrounding counties, depending upon where you are in the country. You might look at regional as, I'm here in New England, so a regional thing for me could be everything from New York City up to Boston, because I'm, nestled right in between. So between those two dynamics, that's within my region of where I'm at. So depending upon what the threat is, makes the determination on bugging in or bugging out from that point. And of course, national, even when you look at just 1/3 of the country, if you just look at the eastern seaboard from Maine down to Florida, or if you look at the Gulf region or the Great Lakes region, those take up significant chunks of our country. So if there was a situation that was affecting that large of an area, it's going to affect the rest of the country for transportation, for communications, for evacuation, for rescue. It's going to bottleneck everything depending upon where it is. And that will then have an immediate domino effect on everything else outside of it. The ripples will continue to move outwards. So thinking about it, number one, when you choose to bug in, going on the basis that you've been preparing, you've got your supplies, you've got your meds, your foods, you've got all your little creature comforts, that's the advantage that, one, you have everything there with you. It's all around you. You also are familiar with your neighborhood, with the streets, with the city, with how things normally go, the ebb and flow. So you can kind of, to almost an extent, feel when something is off or changing without having to directly expose yourself unnecessarily to things. Sometimes it may literally be a case of you can look out the window and you can see the fire station, or you can look down the road and you can see how many people are in that intersection. Is it blocked up, or are cars moving through nice and easy? So staying and bugging in gives you that advantage that you're on your home turf, you have an idea of what's going on, you can be aware of your surroundings without directly having to expose yourself to a potential threat. Bugging out, depending upon where you're going to go, at a certain extent, you may be on a path, of course, taking one of your pre-planned routes, and you're doing fine, but then something else happens a mile up the road that's causing traffic to back up. Now you're taking this side road, and then you're taking the next side road, and then you're entering into a town where you know the town, but you don't know the town well enough to say, oh, I know where this road leads. And then you're on a dead-end street, you're turning around, you're coming down, and you're taking a road, and you think you're making headway, and then 2 miles later, you're literally staring right back at the long line of traffic. You're just a half a mile up, but now you can't even get into that traffic flow. So you got to turn around and try going someplace else again. When you bug out, having a plan of where you're going to go, under what conditions, are you in a vehicle? Are you sure that that vehicle will be ready and available for you to use? And what happens if your vehicle is capable, but the roads are impassable and there are no shortcuts, or the closest thing that you can get to in the direction that you want to go might in some cases be running parallel or the opposite way. You might want to head to that cabin in the woods that you have to go north to, but those roads are blocked. So now you've got to go west for the next 15 miles and then go north and then double back around to get to that location. You may be in a situation where you can't take a vehicle. So all your plans of you have all your supplies, everything's stocked up, ready to go, and you've got things set for your vehicle, but now you're on foot. That changes, one, how much you can take with you, and it also, two, changes how long it'll take you to get there, which if it's an environmental threat, you're going to be exposed longer. So now you have to think about the pros and cons on that. Are you safer staying where you're at and sheltering in place even though you initially wanted to leave? Or would you risk going out and being exposed to the elements, to the threat, whatever it is, in attempts to get to that bug out location? And I did a video with regards to makeshift fallout shelters, and that's kind of the same situation. The fallout shelter that I'm referring to was nothing more than using plastic tarps, sheeting, caulk, duct tape, things like that to reduce the inflow of radioactive particles. It's not going to stop your house from getting blown away if you're near ground zero. It's not going to protect you like steel and lead and concrete would if there's a high level of radiation. It's simply, if you're outside of the blast area, if you haven't been killed within the first hour from extreme radiation, it just helps reduce that wind-blown contaminant particles that are blowing through the area from getting into your house, or at least into sections of your house that you've secured, to keep you alive long enough that hopefully, one, the radiation levels will have died down, or two, hopefully they'll be able to evacuate you, or you can make your escape. Same principle, no matter what that danger, what that threat is, you have to think about how long can you last either in one location bugging in, or in that transitional going from point A to point B. Because as we all know, that if it normally would take you an hour, 2 hours to get to your bug out location, you add 500 extra people all going in that direction, you add another 10, 20 accidents all in that direction, suddenly that 1 to 2 hours becomes 6 hours to almost a whole day, depending upon where you're going, if you're taking side streets and back roads. Some of the pros to bugging out, plain and simple: you get out of Dodge. Whatever the problem is, where you're at, depending upon how big it is, if you can get out quickly, get ahead of it, get there to your other locations safely, you're going to be better off. Because again, the scenario might be a situation where you might have massive riots. You might not think much of it, but depending upon what the cause of the riots are, could make the determination on how safe you are. If you're living smack dab in the middle of a big bustling city and you've got riots going on, cars are getting lit on fire, buildings are catching on fire, there are people getting attacked in the street, there's general chaos and pandemonium, even with or without law enforcement, there is just a sense of danger that you don't want to go out into it. You'd think bugging in would be the safer, wiser thing to do, and you might be right, until your building itself catches on fire and then you have to now flee, running out into that entire melee, the very thing that you are witnessing, but avoiding. You're now embroiled and embedded in it, and you have to, at that point, make your way through there, which, again, I've done a video on what to do in a riot situation, and those are things that you have to kind of think about ahead of time, and it's no guarantee. Nothing in life is, but having the plan, having the thought, having the capability of taking that and putting it into direct action is far better than standing on the street corner, eyes bugged out wide, shivering and shaking in panic and fear, because that's just asking to, have someone steamroll you right over and you become a pizza stain on the sidewalk. It's just the way it is. With local and regional events, they can be mitigated to a certain extent. As an example, Hurricane Katrina. Hurricane Katrina was a regional event. It affected the wide area of the Gulf states, but specifically focusing on New Orleans, that was a local area event. The flooding of the streets, the breaking of the levees, the lack of emergency transportation that should have been provided by the city, if not by the state, all those things that happened on that local level affected how everyone else behaved. But there was still the sense, even as bad as it was, there was still help and support on the outside. How it managed or was not managed is a completely different situation. But that knowledge that, yes, it's terrible where we're at in this moment, but there's still calm around the perimeter. There's still normalcy around the perimeter. Getting to that safe point is a different story. And those people that were there were in that same situation. Many of them, if they stayed where they were at, they'd succumb to, pure plain simple, the flood and the damage that it was bringing. If they decided to bug out, they really didn't have a place to go because anyone that they knew was in the same situation. Maybe 2 blocks up here, 4 blocks over there, whatever the case was. Moving into a wider regional scale, that could have caused even more damage than what it did. It could have washed out many more roads, many more highways, and spread that overall chaos along the entire area, making the perimeter for assistance get pushed back farther and farther. When you have a national level, that is part of what could stem from it. Something major like that, big enough, could cause a national problem because now resources are completely cut off from normal transportation. Even if you say, well, you can fly it in, you may not be able to fly it into the closest airport. So you're still flying it in and then still having to try to truck it an extra 60 to 100 to 200 miles around a lot of the damage just to get it close enough, but still not close where it needs to be, and hope that you can then shuttle things and people back and forth. On a national level, national could be anything. You could have a major economic collapse. You could have a cyber attack, as we've seen with the current movie Leave the World Behind and the upcoming movie Civil War. A lot of small things that happen quick like that are enough to cause a major problem, especially when they can't get a hold of and wrangle in and pin down those initial small issues. Once one goes and the next one goes and the next one goes, it's almost impossible to stop. And even when you do manage to stop it, the damage that's been done in some cases is not necessarily irreversible, but it's going to take a lot more to fix it than it did to break it in the first place, which is kind of true the way life is on a normal basis. But on a national level, you have to start thinking it could be any type of natural disaster. You could have the Yellowstone super caldera blow up. That's going to take a fifth of the nation, boom, right out. If it's as big as what they say it is, and if it does the damage it says, you're going to have a big pothole sitting there in that part of the country for 1,500 miles, everything under ash, gone. If you had a major earthquake on the West Coast, the big one, you could theoretically have tsunamis 60, 70, 200 feet high hit the entire West Coast, Washington, Oregon, California, everything for 1.5 miles in, underwater, done. It all depends upon what that situation is, and that affects everything else because the people that got out need someplace to go. The resources and materials, depending upon what it is and how bad the damage was, may not exist in those areas because those are the areas that produced them. Think about Long Beach. Long Beach is, for our nation, the largest shipping port our country has. If that thing either gets hit by a major tsunami or gets hit by a nuclear bomb or anything large like that and shuts it off, yes, you can still ship stuff into different parts of the country, but you don't have the infrastructure set up the way that entire shipping area is. Nothing that we have currently can handle the same volume that they could handle. And if many of you remember during the COVID period where you had cargo ship after cargo ship being anchored off the shore until everyone was cleared for inspection to then dock and unload, imagine not having a port at all in that area, let alone, having to redirect ships around to the Gulf or around to the East Coast or to smaller ports along the West Coast that are still up and running. It's going to take a lot longer. We're going to run out of that normal flow of resources. And then if something else happens in the interim with the train systems, with the computer systems, communication systems, all that built up on top of it, and you shut an entire country down. Then you have to decide where you're at versus where you're going to go, because in many cases now simply going there is not going to be an option. Roads could be closed and the entire area could be shut off to travel altogether. Resources that you're dependent upon simply just don't exist, or they're in such a limited quantity and location that yes, the farms that grow the food here still have food, but they don't have the refrigeration and the transportation to then get it out to the supermarkets. And it wouldn't matter because the supermarkets and their warehouses, if a cyber attack hits or an EMP hits, they have no way of tracking anything. And believe me, it's not going to be a case of they'll just get 100 people with notebooks and pens and hand count everything. We're not going back to the 1950s. That's just not going to happen. Far too many people, far too much product for anyone to do that. So if you don't have an accurate, up-to-date digital system that can quickly scan it and move it onto a truck, you're not doing it. It's just not going to happen. It's going to go back to, yes, to one extent, small local, which means the areas that grow it are the ones that stow it. They keep it because they know what they have. They know how many people are within that county, within that state. They know that they can get their truck drivers to drive 10 miles, but they're not going to get their truck driver to drive 1,000 miles through all the chaos that's going on. So again, it comes down to, if you're not where those resources are, where certain things are produced, or where the warehouses that still at that point have supplies, you're going to be SOL unless you have your own supplies stocked up and a plan to then continue on when your stocks get low. With bugging out, again, vehicle, on foot, however it's going to be, you have to take into account that wherever you're going to go may not be available to you, no matter what the situation is. You might have a good friend or family that says, oh yeah, you can come to my house. I'm on 10 acres. I'm 20 miles away from the largest town of 15,000 people. But between where you are and where they are, you're passing 2 to 20 million other residents in all the other towns and cities along that way. Even if you took the most backwoods, a roundabout way to get there, threw on an extra 500 miles, you're still exposed to that constant risk of, at a certain point, all the people that were ahead of you are all doing the same thing. They're tired of sitting in the traffic, or they're tired of being in this long line. They're taking this road. They're crossing through that field. They're going in their head, oh, what's over here? And next thing you know, 1, 10, 1,000 other people are ahead of you, headed to the same general location, and they may even come across the same places that you had planned to stop to look for additional resources, because they're there too. They've got nothing but time to think about it. You might get to that bug out location and unfortunately you find a note on the door, hey, we had to leave. The neighborhood was getting a little dangerous. Houses were being set on fire. A chemical spill happened. We've moved on to XYZ location. So now you finally get to the place that you were going to bug out where you were going to be safe, only to find out that you got another 2 days of walking to go before you get to that next location. And again, it's one of those things where it's not something that you can directly control, but it is something that you have to think about, and you have to be able to, at that point, immediately shift and move on to that next plan of, if this happens, this is what I'm going to do. Because you may not have time to mope about and feel sorry for yourself. You got to keep going, whether it's on to that next location or to figure out, oh, I remember the place 10 miles back. We're going that way. If you're going to bug in, same thing again. You count on your supplies that you have, but you also have to plan for what if there's damage to the house. I had a situation where our house had a large limb, say, how do you do, right across the front of it. That was not something that was planned for. Luckily, we're still in a condition where I can call the insurance company, they can call a contractor, and the work gets done. But if this were in a situation where the grid was down, everything has been in complete chaos for weeks, I'm on my own. I have to handle it as best as I can. If that means that I have to suit up and, make my way down to the hardware store and lug back a couple of studs and, chainsaws and everything else that I need to get all this work done, then that's what I'm going to have to do. And I have to be aware of the risks that I take going out and coming back and doing the work as it is necessary. And it's the same thing with all your preps and your supplies. You have to account for something could happen and it'll be completely out of your control. So you have to be ready to keep moving from that point forward. Even if you're staying in the same location, you just have to be prepared to make adjustments to not get stuck in the mindset of, well, this isn't exactly what I wanted, or it's not the way that I thought it was going to be. Oh, well, you got to keep moving. If you do run into a situation where you've got a plan, you've got the group, you've got the rendezvous point, you've got the if this, then this type of scenario set up, more power to you. As long as you and the rest of the people in your group can stick to that and are prepared to stick to that, you can't have cold feet. You can't have flip-floppers going back and forth. Everyone needs to say, okay, we agreed, we're getting into this, we're going to stick to the plan, we're going to help each other, and we're going to move through these scenarios as they come along. Then you're good to go. If you just got a casual, hey, how you doing sort of relationship with people, best not to involve them at all. Period, plain and simple. Best not to involve them at all. Even if you think or believe or even know that they have some skill, some type of advantage that you could use, if you're not on that level where you're trusting their reactions, their responses to things, don't bother getting them involved. Just do it on your own or figure something else out, because the last thing you need is you become mentally dependent upon them and they say, sorry, compadre, no can do, and they're gone in the wind. And that's one of those things where it's a human nature thing. You look first to protect yourself, and then you look outwards to see who else needs your help or who else you're willing to help. And that's the whole thing. Someone may need help, but the person that could give it says, not you, not today, not under these circumstances, sorry. You may be in that situation. You may say, oh, well, I would never do that. But again, never say never, because these things happen. So when it comes down to it, it's still one of those things where bugging out or bugging in is not a concrete thing. It's not etched in stone. It is not, this is this, and that's how it's going to be. You have to remain fluid both in your plans and in your mental process, because whether you choose to bug out and you just say, well, as soon as it turns bad, I'm out of here, you may end up being on a constant cycle of bugging out from one location to the next location to the next location. If you choose to bug in, you say, I'm locking the doors, pulling the shades, and I'm sitting down with a good book. That's fine too. But something may happen that suddenly now you have to bug out. Or worse, you find that when you do want to leave, you're trapped. You're trapped in a situation where it is far too dangerous for you to then leave at your own choosing. And you may be in a condition where you have to get supplies or you need some type of help, but you're too late. You're surrounded by whatever the threat is, whatever the danger is, and you're stuck there. So again, this is one of those things where you think about it, you plan it out, write it on a piece of paper, take a look at it, fold it up, put it away, come back a week later, open it back up and think to yourself, no, I think I need to change something, or I think I need to add this, or I think I need to change the order of operations for what I would do under these conditions. And you think about your local events, your regional, the national events, and how small little things can daisy chain to the next one and get a whole entire cascading situation of failures, because it may be something that starts off small in one area, not related to you, but then by the time it gets to you, it's completely morphed into something different, some mega beast monster that you were not prepared for, that no one saw coming, because it built up along the way. Whatever it was, whether it was a natural disaster or a man-made disaster, the human condition, the human response to disasters can greatly affect how things go. So if people that are unaware of any event going on, suddenly when there's a surge of cars, a surge of people, supplies are being bought up off the shelf, and they have no idea why until they find out that 2 states over, an explosion happened, and then an earthquake happened, and then some poison gas was released, and people are fleeing for their lives, and they're all coming in this direction. Those areas there that they weren't affected at all until the hordes of people started coming in, gobbling everything up. So with that being said, again, I didn't give a definitive answer. I just said that, between bugging out and bugging in, you have to make a choice. And in some cases, it's not necessarily going to be the wrong one, but you have to understand that that choice that you make at that moment right now, compared to at that moment when it does happen, may be completely different. Anyway, that's it for now, and I'll catch you in the next one.